Hey everybody, before you begin the episode, special announcement. Our 100th episode is coming up, and it's going to be a sort of call-in show where you can call in, ask us questions, leave a comment. We have a phone number for you to call, and it's in the States. It is area code 331-267-7268 or 331-BOSS-BOT. So give us a call, leave a comment, ask us a question, and that episode should be recorded sometime near the end of September, so call in before then. Enjoy this episode.
I'll put it this way. Look at everything existing on the earth, all of the card-bearing party members of the organic and inorganic worlds, and you will see that fear is the deepest element that can be grasped in this organic and inorganic world. And there's nothing else other than fear, because nothing else bears within it such dreadful strength. Because apart from fear, nothing else defines anything in the organic and inorganic world to such an enormous degree. Everything can be inferred from it. To say that you can't trace this or that back to fear is ridiculous. So that we're not going to bother with this anymore, but we're going to say enough of these wily excuses, and we will turn our attention to fear, and then we will reach the point where fear becomes the essence of existence.
Hello, this is David. Welcome to another episode of the Books of Some Substance podcast. On this episode, I am joined by Derek Maine. Derek is a fiction reader and writer from North Carolina. His first book, Characters, came out in 2022 on Expat Press. I highly recommend it. It is excellent. And he is a sporadic and very occasional booktuber and reviewer. Also of note, I believe he was the second or third place runner-up in the Hitting Pizza Delivery Boys Riding on Motorcycles with Jelly Beans from the third floor competition. So he'll fit perfectly in today's episode as we talk about László Krasznahorkai's Baron Wenckheim's Homecoming. We get into, of course, Krasznahorkai's form and sentence structures, meaninglessness, chaos, fear, the apocalypse, spirituality, extreme Zen Buddhism, and all sorts of great stuff. Enjoy the episode. I know this is something that was this your first video that you put up on your YouTube page?
The first one, yeah.
The first one, okay.
Yeah.
So what made you want to return to this book?
I think because of that, I wanted to read it again because this was the book where I had no knowledge of YouTube or BookTube or I had no social media at that point. Like, I remember finishing the book on my couch and wanting so badly to be at a bar somewhere where somebody else had read it. And I just wanted to kind of like talk their ear off but it was such a niche interest, right? Because it's this huge tomb of Hungarian literature. Like, there's just no one in my day-to-day life that I would be able to connect with about that, you know? So I ended up, I think I searched for it. It had just come out, at least in America. Like, and I think I searched for conversations about it or something. I found nothing. And so I just pressed record and then uploaded immediately and knew nothing about it. And then that just kind of really put me socially in terms of kind of saying, oh, I'd like to join this conversation and talk about these things. And at that time I was reading just exclusively translated literature and trying to read everything from all over the world. But I couldn't remember, like when we were talking about what books to pick, I couldn't actually remember what it was about this that like entranced me so much, because I had since read The Melancholy Resistance, Satan Tango. I had since read more, and his work it gets muddled a bit in my head typically. There's a very similar themes that he's working with throughout, at least what I've read. So The Melancholy Resistance, right? Like the town that he's describing, you could put that right into the Baron, Wenckheim homecoming town. The same sort of like absurdities exist.
Yeah, I imagine, I don't know if you've come across that passage that it's kind of famous when talking about this book. I think it was in an interview he did of some kind, maybe the Paris Review, where he talks about this is his like one book. Right. So it's War and War, Melancholy Resistance, Satan Tango, or whatever the order is, I can't remember. And then this one. and he feels like it's this complete work. Yeah, so.
Which is really interesting, and I wish I had read those two others to really complete it, and at some point I will. But you can sense that, you can see that. And so I wanted to reread it, frankly, just to get a better understanding of, this was also, I started that at the end of 2018. With you think about how much all of our mental states and everything have changed from then until now because of the course of the world, because of everything, I really wanted to just go back and revisit it and remember, what it was. And I mean, I found it pretty quickly. For me, in just, it shouldn't be so much fun to read because of the nature of how it's laid out. It's very dense. Sometimes it's very hard to find a break in it because of the nature of long sentences, huge sections, but it is so funny. I sat there and just laughed aloud, during, especially with the town stuff, but there's just such an incredible humor with it that I kind of remembered why I was drawn to it for such a dark book, like the section I read to begin with about fear, and I mean, for such a dark book, it was just really funny and entertaining.
Yeah. And it goes from being funny in different ways, from slapstick to coincidental humor, and then immediately is heartbreaking. The moment that sticks out in my head of where this happened so quickly was the Baron when he finally meets his Marietta.
Yeah.
Initially, because of how it's written and how it builds up to this moment of him knocking on the door and him not recognizing her, it's kind of funny. And then you immediately go into her perspective and you're like, oh my God, no, this is not funny at all. This is so sad. Such a sad moment. Yeah. Yeah. He's very good at that. He is very good at that. I think you kind of get at why I think people like reading him so much. There's something, if you are interested in reading these kinds of sentences that just trip along and fold in on each other and expand to the point of near exhaustion sometimes, especially when you're in the professor's head and he's thinking about thinking, it just you can kind of get lost in it, but in such a fun way that it's hard to describe to people outside of another person who may be as sick and twisted as we are that enjoy these kinds of things. As you said, because at work, I would be reading this during my lunch break, and someone would ask, "Oh, what are you reading?" I'm reading this book by this guy, this Hungarian guy named Krasznahorkai. What's it about? It's it's not really what it's about. And then they would just look at a page of this dense, long text and go, "Oh, I would never read that." Yeah.
Yeah, there's something really enjoyable to me about tackling those kinds of books, though, right? Because there's an intimacy in feeling like I'm going to put in the work and the effort, both the intellectual effort, but also just the sheer time, to lose myself in this text. Another thing I wanted to see, you mentioned a professor, and it reminded me of this. The cacophony of his interior dialogue, I really enjoyed, in contrast with the cacophony of the town buzzing for the arrival of the Baron. And I think I definitely think the first time I read it, the professor was my favorite stuff because there's so much philosophical thought in there. It's easy for me to glom onto. But I actually don't think the first time I understood what was the purpose of that, because you could have the book certainly without the professor's sections and point of views and still get at some of the things, but I really do. I like how the professors it's just as chaotic. It's just as illogical, as the anticipation of the town people. It's interesting. The townspeople are looking for a savior. So that's their answer, I think, to whether we call it the apocalypse or sort of the end of civilized society, which I think is where we're, at least that's the milieu he's in. That's the area he's sort of describing. It's this is the end of the earth kind of idea. And I thought there was I thought that in here there was options for what your search for meaning could be in that kind of broken world. And for the town folks, they're looking, for that savior figure. Baron's looking for love. But I like how the professor is looking to just eliminate thought. Like he's
Yes.
going through these thought immunization exercises. And his answer is, no God, no savior, no love. I want to just erase my consciousness, or at least leave it alone, leave it to the side.
Yeah. He's like a militant Zen Buddhist.
Yeah.
He knows that there's no eliminating thought. So meditation is to sit and just let the thoughts come and go. But he's like, no, I can't just do that at any time. So I think he's talking to some random person at a train station waiting for a train that doesn't come or comes late. I can't remember. And he's talking about how 2 hours a day he exhausts his mind.
Yeah. I love
so that he thinks all of his thoughts in 2 hours so that he doesn't have to think the rest of the day.
It's such a great choice to have him study moss too.
Yes.
That's brilliant. It's actually such a strong metaphor that it's one of those that doesn't even need to be spelled out. It's just really brilliant. You know what I mean? The slow growing moss. There's just something that you think there would be nothing in it to explore, and he's found a way to rack his brain for years, just focusing intellect on this thing.
Yes. And the fact that he's considered one of 3 experts in the world and is so well respected, which is just such an absurd concept that this professor of moss would be so well regarded in the community. Yeah.
It's interesting the time. What did you think about? I mean, I know it says we're in modern day, and there's some even slight contemporary touches. I think they Google something in it. I think there's some references.
Yeah. There's mention of iPhones. There's there's iPhones. There's Googling. There's the internet.
There's
more than
else.
one mention of The Real World from MTV season 2, which imagining László Krasznahorkai watching The Real World amuses me to no end. Because he, for some reason, he mentions it multiple times. It even appears in his list at the end of the book.
Oh, does it really? I didn't look through that. That's great.
Oh, his sheet music library, where he talks about utilized materials destroyed, I think, is in there.
Yep, utilized materials missing and utilized materials destroyed.
Yeah, he goes through everything.
Yeah.
So yeah. Speaking of, I know this is kind of jumping a bit, but I was thinking about the opening, the warning. What do you make of that? Do you view this as simply a dictatorial leader of an orchestra, or is this something different, something metaphorical? Because I kept thinking about it as I was reading, trying to think is this an author talking to his characters? Is this an author talking to his readers? Is this something else as to be an example for something else in the book? I had a hard time really parsing what that warning was.
I don't know. But I do like the thought, at least, of it being to his characters. I didn't feel like it was directed at me as a reader. So if it was, then that's my failing and not making that connection. But I felt a distance there, and I still feel a voyeuristic quality in reading his work, where there's a distance between the reality he's created and us, and the reader.
Yeah.
But I don't know what the metaphor is for. The conductor stuff comes up a lot in his work. I don't know what the conductor or what that idea is necessarily a stand-in for, though.
Yeah. Yeah, he refers to him as an impresario who demands exclusively unconditional dependency, naturally unidirectional and one-sided. And he tells the people that he's speaking to begin to regard life from now on, not with joy, but with suffering. And it definitely feels more like the author addressing the characters in a weird way that are part of this symphony of suffering. And
it's not something I thought about a lot, but it does open with taking an apple out. So, and then in the warning, it mentions, I know everything, I have all knowledge. So as I'm just listening to you and talking through it, I mean, that metaphor comes alive a little more perhaps in, the tree of knowledge, eating the apple, and in which case it would be a warning to characters because he knows what's in store for them, what their fate is. And fate is actually one of the themes of that, 3 pages or 4 pages, whatever it is.
Yeah. It's an interesting way to start a book. and you touched on something that I think is true, that his work kind of, I don't like calling it difficult, but it feels like resistant to, there's like not a battle. Battles sounds over dramatic, but
Right.
there's like this resistance between myself, the reader, and the book in how it's structured and how he writes, but also in trying to understand what, if anything, he's trying to say, other than, I guess, in the passage that he addresses directly to Hungarians through this, which seems pretty direct. I don't know if there's another way to interpret that, but do you feel the same way? You kind of mentioned that you do.
I do. I feel that way and I think that it is at least somewhat feels stylistically purposeful, or however you want to put it. I just think about it like these long sentences that I was doing one where I was trying to just completely follow with points, like what he's trying to say in this sentence, because there's just so many digressions and asides. And with this work and really all of his work, you don't want to skip the digressions and asides, because that's where the humor almost always is. That's where the character's subconscious thoughts or desires are usually placed. But when you get to the action of what just happened in that sentence, it's usually very little. I mean,
Yes.
you can go a very long time learning a lot about the way someone is sort of being neurotic or thinking through or doing something. But then when you think about the actual action in the story, because it has a plot, it has all the traditional elements, of pacing, but very little will happen in all of this. And at times I go back and forth. I think at times, okay, well, what we're sort of being presented with, or what he wants to get across, are the digressions and asides and the mechanics of the story and stuff, just like a lot of authors in postmodernism, which I'm not sure he'd be classified as, but authors, who have all the tools of modernism and postmodernism to work with, are going to typically, use. But there's enough philosophical meat on the bone in terms of what he has his characters wrestling with, that I think that those are the messages. I just don't know that we're supposed to believe that any of the characters have any answers. I mean, it feels very much like, to me, he was sort of putting out archetypal ideas of meaning structures that an individual could have, types of journeys an individual could have, which would give you the purpose, and then sort of shows them, in my opinion, to all be equally futile, or end up, equally disappointing. Maybe that's the way to put it, because no one gets any of the things. The town. My favorite example of that is the town and the mayor. Like, just the way that their imaginations run wild on what's going to happen when this Baron comes back. And we haven't mentioned this, but the Baron, he did come from a great family, but he's been in Argentina, I think, like playing slot machines and owing a casino just a ton of money. He's being sent home in total shame. A secretary's traveling with him. I think his finances, if there's any, are completely controlled. I mean, he's just not bringing what they think he's bringing, but they think he's going to come and save everything. And the plans and the imagination they get through that. Like, I kept thinking of that famous thing of a stranger comes into town or someone goes on a journey, and how like all novels are sort of one of that. And this has both of those elements here, but he's going to come home. He's going to decide that, like, there's this woman there that's going to save him. The town's going to decide that Baron is coming back to save us. and just how quickly that peters out. The buildup of both those things is hundreds of pages, and the payoff on each is very short.
Yeah. And
just quickly.
Both, like I said, both funny and tragic.
Yeah.
Like the Baron to me is a really interesting character because you really feel, or at least I did, I feel sorry for him. Like he knows he's not the brightest person. He calls himself an idiot, and his brain, his mind is deteriorating. Like he's losing memory. He's attached to this woman that he can't recognize anymore. And he decides to finally, he's like, you know what? He keeps asking himself this question, not why was I born, but why am I alive? Or not why am I inverting those two? Anyway, but he decides to kill himself, essentially. Yeah. And he's wandering the train tracks. And as he's wandering, he's questioning these questions. And then he finally realizes, no, you know what? I know why I'm here. I'm here for love. I'm going to go reclaim my love.
Yeah.
And then he makes the wrong step. The train's coming. He tries to get out of the way and he dies. But the way he moves into the town, like you said, and everyone sort of falls behind him, and he just sort of moves along like a... Did you ever read or see the movie Being There?
No.
Okay. So it's a great... the movie in particular, I think, is great. It's Peter Sellers, one of his best performances. He plays essentially an idiot who people think is a genius. And he lucks himself into a position of immense power in the government by speaking about a garden, because that's all he knows. He worked at a garden, and he's a gardener. And when he tries to explain this, people think his name is Chauncey Gardner, and he speaks about, winters and summers, and people are like, oh, this guy's a great economic genius. In a way, the Baron is like the sort of negative version of Chauncey Gardner, the way he just moves through everything. People put all these expectations on him, and everything falls apart in such horrible fashion.
Yeah, and the condition of the town, the condition of the psyche of the town leading up to Baron coming is just, I think that's some of his most biting and harsh observations. I mean, he really, Krasznahorkai just has sort of no love, I think, for, this contemporary town, where it is now, what it was, even the smallness of what it was. Like, is it Lenin's Ditch that they're always trying to take people to and show people? It's like, even in its glory days, this was such a slept on, or skipped over town. I don't know a lot about Hungary at all. I mean, I know nothing about that. I've seen that these towns that he's that are supposed to be his hometown, that he knows very well, and I think that makes sense, particularly like you said earlier, how he addresses Hungarians, directly. But I do think there's something, and this of course happens with translated literature. I do think there's something lost on my end as a reader by not knowing the place, really, like culturally, not understanding what its place was. If this was an American novel and somebody said Ohio, for me, I would be able to place all of my preconceived notions of Ohio in it. But I can't do that for a Hungarian town. And in fact, for probably the rest of my life, my understanding of a Hungarian town is going to come from László Krasznahorkai, which is interesting.
Yeah. And probably not great for Hungarian towns, I would say.
No, they're probably not too hard. But it's not like it's not like Bucharest, which is at least in the book Solenoid by Cartarescu. It's at least given like some bits of glory or beauty. I mean, this just, to me, it's like bulldozers have already come through, and the people left are kind of clinging. I mean, there's a real. I think on the back of mine, it's got the Susan Sontag quote about apocalyptic. Yeah, she calls him the Hungarian master of the apocalypse.
I think there's a way to view it as somewhat universal behavior. I think you can't help but try to attach the thinking of the town into something I think you choosing Ohio, sorry people of Ohio, but is somewhat apt because you go to like middle of nowhere Ohio, there's this, it's not a place of former glory, and there's people holding on to things, and there's this undercurrent of fear, as you started the episode with, running through fear of immigrants, fear of outsiders, fear of homelessness. Then these things are like this undercurrent in the book. Anytime a person goes outside, they're sort of confronted with this. And there's people always whispering. In the beginning, they're talking about when you first sort of get a voice of the town, it's at a cafe, and they're all talking about how when any one of these, I don't know, whatever derogatory term they use, adjectives for gypsies, roll into town, the thing you need to do is just get them out as quickly as possible.
Yep.
Like that's the voice of the town that you hear, not attached to any particular character. It's just people whispering in a cafe.
Yeah.
And I think it is emblematic of the sort of town's mentality itself, and that they're hoping that greatness will return in the form of this baron who comes from this family.
Yeah.
And of course it's fruitless.
I remember like first hearing, when I first heard about Krasznahorkai, connecting him to some sort of apocalyptic writing, I think probably because of that quote. And then I looked it up and saw that he said, instead of expecting the apocalypse to come, we need to understand that we are already living in it. The apocalypse has already commenced.
Yeah.
And I actually think that does such, I mean, of course, his own words, right? Do a better job than the critical stuff I've said in defining it. Yeah. He is saying it's come, and it's, you know, it's one of those things where it's like, it takes a long time to end, you know, you know, it's like it has this end times, you know, feel to it. And the people have all the anxieties of that. And I think that it's arguable that alone could be his great artistic project, or his sort of message, you know, is instead of sitting around waiting for it, you know, that it's here. And, you know, then we're watching kind of the grotesque nature of everyone's reactions, everyone's neuroses to it, everyone's different ways of managing it. And as I said earlier, they all seem futile. I mean, it's a despairing take overall, I think, on any kind of search.
Yeah. There's maybe a hint of hope in those that escaped the town, like the professor, his daughter, Marietta. I can't remember her actual real name. Marika, maybe?
Marika, yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah, she flees the town and runs into the professor, doesn't fully recognize him, but they're outside. They're in a different city. Yep. And it's implied that just this town is engulfed in flames at the end, right? Not the entire world.
Just this town, yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I guess there's a little bit of hope there. Maybe.
Yeah, escape. Yeah, I guess so. Like the boundary.
Yeah, there's a quote. I'm just looking at some of the quotes of the professor, trying to get at some sort of idea of what might be behind a lot of this. I'm just going to read two of them. They're kind of near the same part of the book. He says, first and foremost, we have to make it clear when it comes to such auxiliary concepts as reality or existence, the only thing we should perceive are the events through which it can easily be seen that the world is nothing more than an event lunacy. A lunacy of billions and billions of events, and nothing is fixed, nothing is confined, nothing graspable. Everything slips away if we want to clutch onto it, because there isn't any time. And by that I mean there isn't any time for us to grasp at something, because it always slips away, because that's its function, as it is nothing more or less than the great flow. And then a little later, and this is where I want to get with you now, so you can comprehend fear in this system, which of course is not a system, but instead is chaos.
That's brilliant. Yeah. It's hard to, it's the fact that it's its function. It's hard to hear that even. There's a bleakness in that I've struggled with personally. I think most people have for many, many years. And I don't think that I have read much that is as stark. I mean, the chaos of events and everything sort of being random things where we bump up against, right? That's a popular concept in, you know, philosophy, physics, you know, biology. I mean, that I can get my head around, but when the function, when it's just, it's designed for that, you know, and then it just feels so foolish and futile to, you know, look for patterns and look for meaning and to find, and I think as readers, like we're kind of predisposed to that. We're predisposed to wanting to make some sense, and at least I am. And his sort of final summation of that, and that's throughout his works, I think, like that there is really nothing to make sense of is I think the darkest point of the work.
Yeah. And I don't know how personal you want to get, but I'm curious, how much of that do you believe?
I don't know. I'm at middle age now, and I have gone through phases with it, and I think that I would classify myself now as someone who hopes that is not true, but has not experienced, so either through experiential evidence or just, scientific evidence, whatever, found much to counter it. I think that it's most likely, that's correct, and that this is a random series of events, but that is such a deeply unsatisfying answer to me that I, think that I will continue, probably like most people do, to try to find something that is satisfying to me in some way, logically, but a little more spiritually fulfilling. But I haven't found that personally.
Yeah.
And intellectually, I can certainly, I could certainly understand and could probably debate Krasznahorkai's view much easier than I could a spiritual one, even as I sort of do hope for a spiritual one to come to me at some point. Now, he does have a lot of Buddhism in here, I should say. So as I was saying that, I thought I should remark that there's a very, very, and I, I'm a Western person who, like a lot of people, spent a few years very interested in that and certainly tried to, that to fill something there. And I found it to be more of a philosophy than necessarily a spiritual religion or something to follow. But Krasznahorkai, I just say it's not that he is completely devoid of spirituality, but when it comes to why we exist and why we think, I think that the answer of it's all chaos, it's all random, is still very disturbing to me.
Yeah.
What about you?
I agree. I think it's incredibly disturbing, but it tends to be the thing that I side with the easiest because it's just what I see. That doesn't mean that like everything in life is meaningless. And I know it's a bit cliche to say that we assign meaning to things, but I think we do. You have to. Otherwise, you're just... If I truly believed in some sort of extreme form of nihilism, I wouldn't read the book. I wouldn't be talking to you. I wouldn't be alive right now. But so there is something to that. And I am also a bit of a rationalist and believe that people have agency enough to make decisions to try to avoid falling into the traps that these characters fall into.
Yep.
So I'm hoping there's at least that, like it's not all just synapses in my brain forcing me to do these things. Like there's the rational form of it, then there's the religious form of it, which he doesn't get into at all. But
I get somewhat frustrated with I think it's Camus. It's certainly like a tenet of that. I don't know if he said it, but the line was something like, "It is he who has to fill the void," or something. We have to find the thing to fill the void. And I'm fairly frustrated and resentful of that idea at times because I do have a little bit of antagonism about, listen, I feel like I was just dropped here. Like there was obviously no choice on you or I part on being born, and we just sort of land here. And then, these things that you learn, I have young kids, my kids are 12 and 10, right. And watching them grapple with the truth of life and that there is this, incredible suffering that comes along with it, is more difficult than even when I was a kid and I realized that, right? And so seeing again someone sort of come to this, and then we all then have to go through this our own journey to fill the void. I don't know why or who I should be mad at. Maybe the fact that I think there's something to be mad at is a sign that I believe somewhere within me that there is a spiritual answer. But it irks me to no end, really. And I think that's also because I don't feel that much has happened in the area of philosophy to answer that kind of question for perhaps 60 years at this point. I feel like, the interesting areas of philosophy went more into a futurism and sort of digital analog, and there's simulation stuff. But when it seems like we just ended with existentialism, and there was just nothing past that really for us to say when it came to how to live your life, how to think about why your life exists at all.
Yeah. I would say reading this book is going to force you to face that question without a doubt.
Yes.
So it might not be pleasant, but it certainly feels essential, or at least it feels unavoidable.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. It feels like a journey you sort of have to take. I do like that. I do like the journey as metaphor, and especially like that he was leaving a gambling mecca and gambling debts, because that's such a playground, like an adult playground, that it's like the Baron has been in this surreality, for many, many years, just sort of disconnected from the realities of the actual world. And to have him come and then face what the world, and for him, this is the entire world because it's his hometown, for him to face like the reality of the world and see how unimpressive it is, and how unfulfilling it is. I like that juxtaposition. I also liked thinking about the Baron in Argentina and in casinos, because he's put on the train and he's kind of treated like such an idiot that I have a hard time at times imagining him like with any sort of self-sufficiency, or even at sometimes like ideas of his own, right? Like, it seems like he would, you could just kind of move him through whatever. But obviously he lived an entire life. I think he's in his 60s, or, he's an older gentleman, right? Yeah. I'm 60.
I think he's mid 60s, and you get glimpses of him thinking rather complex thoughts at times. And you get glimpses of his letters so there's somebody there, but there's also a sense that he's never really had to take care of mundane reality in any sort of way, that he's just been sort of chauffeured through life somehow. Like, I might mention that he has a valet or some butler type person that was with him in Argentina, but that couldn't travel with him because wasn't going to get paid, maybe? I'm not sure.
Yeah, there was something where he wasn't coming, yeah.
Yeah. But you brought up gambling, and the line that Dante gives, I just found it because I think it's funny and interesting. He says, "You can take many things away from people," he said. This is Dante. "And many things have been taken away from them, but their dignity is something you can never take away. And one of the basic components of human dignity is for a person to feel free at times. And freedom is exactly what I offer them. That freedom is offered by anyone who facilitates involvement in the world of slot and gaming machines, because gaming is the natural configuration of freedom, if I may put it like that." Just such a funny way to talk about and use that idea.
It's fantastic because you wouldn't put those first two pieces together. Yeah. Of course he does.
Yeah. And I think it's meant to be silly and absurd. And of course, anytime you see people using the word freedom too much, at least most people, you tend to put up like, okay, they're trying to sell me something. They're trying to manipulate me. And I think he's trying to do that. But you mentioned the Baron just gambling away for years. And it's only upon returning to his hometown and not gambling that he really falls apart. So maybe maybe freedom is dangerous outside of gambling. I don't know. I'm just trying to wrap my head around.
Yeah, I really saw it as he was able to, because of his family and wealth and whatnot, he was able to essentially be completely distracted by frivolities and also everything, as we mentioned, all the mundane details of life taken care of. And this is considered, I think, by a lot of people to be almost an ideal existence. Like, we only get one go round, but if you get your go round where you have a very wealthy family, right, and you can just go be at a adult playground for most of your life and have very little responsibility or whatever, I kept thinking, like, there are still lucky people at the end times, right? Like, there's still going to be, people born into wealth, and people that have, their 80 years on this planet are still quite pleasant, right? Because they're sheltered, from so many realities. How brutal to come home, at the end when your mind isn't working quite as well. And he has, actually, I kind of want to read this one part where he goes back to the town. The city was so small and dark, the streets were so narrow, the houses were so low built and run down, and the sky above them was also so low that he would be fully inclined to state that this was not the same town. And yet he was compelled to acknowledge that it was exactly the same. But it was as if somehow it had become a copy, as if he could only remember, but with hair's breadth accuracy, the original. This, however, was just a copy, not the real town, and he could only hope the real one would be coming along soon. The first time I stopped at that one, and I made a little flag on there. And the first time I thought that I looked at it, I thought about a child's memory, of course, versus, when you're at that stage. And I think most of us can feel that have left places, this looks like the copy of the town. I do really like the detail of the sky being a little too close. There's something I really like about that, particularly in connection with how it does end, in flames and the sky. That was really interesting. But I think it's because he never had to see it. Like, the second time I went back and read through that, I'm like, well, but he never had to see the town. Like, he was in such a different position, in this town. And we're as a reader thrown into the midst of all the townspeoples, all the sort of collective consciousness of this group of people. And he feels, even though he's from here, like such the outsider, the ultimate outsider, because he has not, I don't think it had to struggle and suffer the way that many people who stayed and who stay do and did. So through that, it's like, I think he may have seen the town, that copy as he's coming in, like that's the actual town. And the other thing is his memory, his thing that his film that he's put over in his head, and he may not have had to see it as a child.
Yeah. And the same thing happens with the photograph that he carried with him for however long, his entire life. And he would just look at it and think of this woman. The photograph is not the woman, but in his mind, that's who she is. And then when faced with reality, he does not recognize her.
So it's that's certainly the best that's the best plotting part in the book. It's really shocking when you get to it. I did think the first time I did think that there would be, unrequited, certainly, but having him not recognize her is just such an incredibly bleak artistic choice. I like how you said at the beginning, you do kind of immediately go to her perspective when, there's been points hundreds of pages earlier where it seems like she didn't want to be bothered with this at all. This was
she didn't even remember him.
Right. This is total, like this is a violation in her life. And she's not excited about this.
Yeah. But that little spark of hope starts to build and shine. And then, of course, Krasznahorkai just stomps it out.
Yeah. Well, and everyone, the characters build things up in their head. And then when Krasznahorkai gets down to building the base reality of events, it's just nothing like it. It's not what anyone wanted or thought it would be like.
Even with the professor and his hut in the thorn bush, he imagined he would finally escape the chaos of the world and what it wants from him. And he could just go to this place where no one goes. He could do his thought immunization exercises. But reality, it encroaches. You can't shut yourself out from the world in that way. And
it encroaches immediately.
Sometimes you got to kill a Nazi,
That's right. Well, it encroaches immediately too. It's very quick that his daughter is in the front yard, essentially, in the thorn bush with signs up, trying to get him to come out and, trying to get him to basically take responsibility for his life and for things external to his world right here. And, that's his illusion of complete solitude and not having to be sort of a member of the outside world is broken, I think, in the first like 10, 15 pages.
Yeah. I can't decide now, just thinking about it. I think having that back and forth between the professor, the townspeople, the Baron really works well, because you were talking about which you liked more on your first read. And I think it's easy to really, because he starts off the book and you really get a sense of who he is. And then of course you leave on this cliffhanger of sorts to be thrown into the town and the Baron and everything. So it's easy to kind of like and root for the professor and enjoy the passages, but having that balance of moving back and forth really works well in the book, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. I one thing I definitely remember, or I was cemented this time, I would sit down to, I'm sure your life's probably somewhat similar. I have reading periods, throughout the day. And this book requires a pretty long chunk to get through, not just because it's long, but because earlier, as I was saying, the sentences themselves are very long to where it can be hard to find an appropriate break. And I'm someone as a reader who likes, an appropriate break so that 6 to 12 hours later, when I pick it up, I can kind of immediately go back. My consciousness can just immediately enter the world. That's difficult with this. But one thing I noticed throughout my reading was there are some paragraph breaks, and I would get to one at a point where it was, time to go to bed or time to work or do something. And his use of like cliffhanger type devices at the end of those paragraph breaks made it almost impossible to not keep reading. It's actually a page turner. I think I really would describe it like that. As weird as that sounds, given its heft and the way that those, like you said, when you show a coworker the whole wall of text, but it actually is a page turner, because once you're into the content of the story, you just really want to know what this next thing is going to be. Like what, each of the, he shows a mastery of plotting in this that is not, I think, sort of unexpected considering what it is.
Yeah. And oftentimes when a paragraph break happens, it's shifting to another character as well.
Right. Yep.
So you're immediately thrown into another scene. You're like, okay, let's see where this is going. Or it's picking up from where you were left off previous. Like, oh, okay, we're going back to this character. Let's see where they're at right now. And I actually described it, like you said, as a page turner. I described this to someone when they were asking, a coworker, that it was experimental fiction with a sort of Stephen King-like storyline, because it feels like a Stephen King book. And if you just look at the plot of like this town, this unknown darkness descending upon it, and you get all these little people, there's all these little mini storylines. It felt to me like I was reading Krasznahorkai does King. It's very odd.
That's really good, though. I mean, I think that probably gets at why I thought the plotting was just so good. There's such classic elements to the story, I mean, and I think that's because you're following a journey, for so much of it, but there's classic elements to it. And it's not, the experiment is in its form, right?
Yeah.
I mean, And so I see the experiment, I see it works best when we're inside a character's thoughts, like I said, their neuroses, whatever, and we can just travel the kind of snake of their thought process through to its illogical end, because it is usually, the people are sort of as illogical, individually as they are collectively. There is an insanity running through most of the town characters, for sure.
Yeah. A desperation for something, and through that desperation, a kind of madness.
Yeah, and I think it's an example where the form works with that really well, because you do get lost in their own, conscious, their own neuroses, their own, all those, and you kind of need these long rambling sentences that are, by the way, grammatically perfectly correct, which credit to the translator and I can't write long sentences like that at all. It would drive me crazy. But the fact that you sort of can't find your place sometimes on a page and like have to shift your eyes up and then maybe a bit down to find exactly where you're at. It has the experience, it feels like the experience of being dropped into a town, to a place, or being dropped into a character's psyche and sort of having to find your way through it.
Yeah. He also utilizes that writing style to do like these sweeping panorama views of the town. Specifically, and this is something I wanted to ask you about, so I'm going to read a passage that shows this. When the convoy first passes through the town. Mm-hmm. I don't know where to start it because it's quite long, but let me see. So he raised his pint glass to drain the last drop from it, and then suddenly he stopped halfway through the movement, and the others stopped as well. From Toto to JT, all 27 of them, they all froze in the middle of whatever they happened to be doing. And on the television that was installed up there in the corner, the program stopped, the picture stopped, and the sound stopped. And for one moment, the entire biker bar and the picture of the television screen came to a standstill. The hand of the barman behind the counter came to a standstill, as it was just approaching the open drawer of the cash register holding a 1,000 forint note. And in all the pint glasses, the beer foam came to a standstill. And in the beer foam, the bubbles that were just then trying to make their way upward so they could burst on the surface, they all came to a standstill. And on the counter, all the points of light in the beer rings froze because everything stopped. Everything came to a dead halt. Everything froze. For a moment, life stopped in the biker bar, because this moment somehow had become shattered, as if some kind of weighty, dark, horrific fear had broken out, disturbing everything that existed, and everyone looked up. They looked up awry at the television screen, as if there would be some explanation on that screen for the existence of this weighty, dark, horrific fear within them. But there was nothing up there, because on the television screen the picture had also come to a stop. And yet they still looked up awry, and no one and nothing knew what to do next. And at the same time, so that's one sentence right there. Yeah. The next sentence starts with, and at the same time, something also happened with Marika, with Irene, with the mayor and the deputy mayor, with the chief secretary, with the director of the municipal utility services, with the family physician, and with Miss Dora, and with the woman behind the counter in the espresso bar, the entire women's chorus along with the choir master, the entire television crew with the reporters, with the sales girls in the fabric shop, with Auntie Ibolika, and with the chief groom and the four horses, there we go, now harnessed, and with the stable boys who were still slacking off, and moreover with the fleeing professor, and even with the Linzer Tort, something had happened. And it all happened exactly in the same moment, because that moment, everywhere in the town had somehow shattered apart. Everything came to a halt from fear to a dead stop because of the fear which had swept across the city. Although nobody had lost their common sense, this fear which came upon them was overpowering, and everybody gazed up awry, seeking for an explanation as to what this was. But there was no explanation. There was only fear, pure fear of something unknown, and nobody and no one knew what to do next. And later you get more descriptions of the convoy that moves through town. It comes through, I think, twice, maybe?
I mean, what I want to say about that leads to something I did want to ask, so the cinematic quality of that section was breathtaking. I mean, you can see all of the things. I just see it through a camera lens, all of the things like stopping, standing still, just suddenly. And the fear, I mean, he's back to the fear there again. I mean, and looking up at the television to try to determine, tell me why I'm feeling this way. Tell me why suddenly this is here, and hoping that there's something there, and there's just not, that being gone too. But it made me think, so he's a longtime collaborator with a filmmaker that's one of the most famous filmmakers, auteurs of all time. I've never seen any of the films. Have you?
Yeah, they're fantastic and incredibly long.
That's what I know about them, is that so I'm actually like I'm not a very big film person. I like great movies, and I've definitely had phases through it, but in general, there's too much going on in my view, like stimulation wise with film. Typically, like I want to be able to create some part of the artistic experience for myself. And I think that's why I prefer fiction, because you can build the worlds in your head. But the things I'd always heard about, at least Satan Tango is the most famous, I believe, on the film side, right? Isn't that the one that's just like 6 hours long or something?
Most of them, I think Satan Tango might be 7, close to 7. Wow. Yeah, but he's made quite a few movies. They've worked together. At least 2 of them, I think, are based off of his novels, and then he's also worked with him to write a screenplay or 2, is my understanding.
Well, I need to now that I went back through this, I need to go and watch a Bellatar Krasznahorkai, one of those movies together. Well, which one do you recommend?
I think you can do Satan Tango, or I think there's one, I can't remember what they changed the title to. It might be like Werckmeister's Harmonies or something. I can't remember.
Oh, yes. The name Werckmeister's Harmonies. Yep.
Yeah.
So that one's based on the Melancholy of Resistance.
Yes.
So that one would be good. I mean, either one of those would be.
Those are both good.
And it would probably give me an idea of this town, even in Baron Wenckheim, this more visual, idea of it, since I'm creating that part as I'm reading this. But I assume when I hear 6 or 7 hour film, I don't even know how to start.
Yeah. Oh, I think I've fallen asleep watching them because not a lot happens for large chunks of time. So if one of the reasons why you don't like movies is overstimulation, fear not. This is slow cinema.
Excellent.
Indeed. But yeah, it's beautiful. It's strange. It's violent. It's very much like his movies. If you were to imagine the sentences as shots, just these long meandering things. They work, I think, quite well together.
That's awesome.
It's a very different feel though, because when you're reading this, the sentences almost induce anxiety at times. Whereas
you do with me. Yep.
On film, it's slow and you are left just be in this space, and you're not given a lot to think about except for what's in front of you. So it's a very different experience. And
those kind of artistic collaborations are very fascinating to me too, so it'll be nice to have that. I also think Krasznahorkai is someone that I will probably read all of his works, hopefully, if I get, how many years we're supposed to get.
Yeah.
But I think you mentioned something about this word before, and I have some difficulty with it, maybe important or essential. But as far as contemporary literature, I mean, there's nothing I've come across better. There's stuff as sort of as good, as essential, whatever, but it's the anxieties of our world and sort of where we're at and us trying, clawing and fighting to make a meaning out of existence in this sort of stage, both environmentally and industrial and geopolitically. It feels very close to, if it's not the best representation, it's certainly one of very few.
Nice. I think that's a great way to end this, actually. I think you summed it up perfectly. Nice. Yeah.
Nice. Awesome. That's great. And I love
it. Thanks for listening. You can find Derek on Twitter at Mainely, Mainely. And you can also find him on Substack at Wartime Author. Check out his writing there. It's excellent. And also check out Expat Books and his book, Characters. For more on Books of Some Substance, you can find us at the website, booksofsomesubstance.com, on Twitter and Instagram at booksosubstance. And of course, another reminder to call in for our 100th episode special. And again, that number is 331-267-7268 or 331-BOSS-BOT. We are really looking forward to it. Until next time, happy reading. eternity will last as long as it lasts.